So say you know a bunch of scales, box patterns. You have that down, and you sort of know what all of this is. What do you call this? I mean, if you have a book where that's pattern 1 because it's the first pattern in the book, and then the next one is pattern 2 because it's the next one, and the next one is pattern 3, pattern 4, pattern 5. Well, those numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those are absolutely irrelevant musically, because what you would be calling pattern 1 would begin on the 3rd step of the key of C. And the highest note in that pattern is the 5th step of the key of C. So why are you going to call it pattern 1? What if you name it something that relates to the musical idea that's here, that's happening here? So that is, you could associate it with Phrygian mode if you want to use mode terminology. So a lot of times this pattern gets called Phrygian mode. Now Phrygian mode ends on the note it begins on. So if you're playing E Phrygian mode, you would begin and end on E. F, G, that breaks out of the mode. This G is the 5 of the key, and that's Mixolydian mode until you do that. So it's Phrygian mode, it's Mixolydian mode, it's also Lydian mode, the 4 of the key of C, if you begin and end on F. So you have 3 possible modes that happen here that cover all 6 strings 2 octaves each. So why not just use the number of the lowest pitched note and say this is the 3 zone, the zone that begins on the 3rd step of the key. And let's call it a zone because it's an area of the fingerboard where those certain things happen. So likewise, starting on G is the 5 of the key of C. And if we play this pattern, that's not strictly Mixolydian mode, but it begins on the 5, it ends on the 6. So we could say Mixolydian and Aeolian. Or we could just name it the 5. And then this is the 6 because it begins with the Aeolian and the high note is the 1, the tonic of the key. So we have Aeolian mode, we have Locrian mode, and we have Ionian mode, spanning 2 complete octaves. The next of our zone patterns begins on the 7th step of the key, on the 7th fret B in the key of C. Now this pattern, like the open position 3, does not require a hand shift. There's one more pattern, the 2, starting on the 10th fret in the key of C on D. D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F. That gives us 5 patterns, 5 box patterns, or 5 zones. We can take those 5 patterns and divide them into upper and lower groupings of strings. The 3 lower strings form their own symmetry. Let's look at that. Say we take the open string position, the 3 zone. So we start with E and then F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F. E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F. That pattern combines the Phrygian mode and the Lydian mode, 1 octave of each. Phrygian mode, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, and Lydian mode, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F. And then we can go to the 7 zone, starting on the 7th fret on B. B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And that combines the Locrian mode, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and the Ionian mode, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Now those two blocks of 9 notes each are symmetrical with each other. They are palindromic. The interval structure of one is the opposite of the interval structure of the other, just as the Phrygian mode and the Ionian mode are opposite, and the Lydian mode and the Locrian mode are opposite. So it follows that a pattern that contains the Phrygian and Lydian mode would have an opposite interval structure from a pattern that contains the Locrian and Ionian mode. So we have the Phrygian Lydian and the Locrian Ionian. 9 notes each, symmetrical with each other. In between those two patterns, there are 2 other zones. The 3 zone at one end, the 7 zone at the other end, the 5 and the 6. And between the 2 of those, we have another symmetrical pair, and this time only one mode in each of those patterns, the Mixolydian and the Aeolian. The Mixolydian mode and the Aeolian mode are indeed palindromic. But let's simplify things a little bit. Instead of treating the Mixolydian mode and the Aeolian mode as 2 separate entities, we will merge them into one pattern. How do we do that? Well, if we start on the 3rd fret G, 5th fret A, 7th fret B, and then go to the next string, C, D, E, on those same 3 frets, and then F, G, A, we now have a block of 9 notes that contains the Mixolydian and the Aeolian mode. Starting on the 5 of the key, G, we ascend until we get to A on the 4th string. 9 notes, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. And now you can see that that pattern has its own internal symmetry. 3 notes per string, a whole step and another whole step on each string, 2 whole steps per string, 3 strings in a row. Now this is what happens if you start on the 5 of a key. If you start on the 5th degree of any key, you will get 2 whole steps, a half step, 2 more whole steps, a half step, 2 more whole steps until you get to the 9th note in the sequence. Whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step. That pattern, we can think of that as a zone all by itself, as a box, as a block, whatever word you want to use. I call it the big box. The big box connects the 3 zone and the 7 zone. Now, by playing those 3 9-note sequences, we have all the notes of the system on those 3 strings between the open strings and the 10th fret. Of course, on the 11th fret, there are no notes belonging to the key of C, and on the 12th fret, the pattern begins again. So if we move to another key, we will have that same set of patterns, just 3 patterns, 3 blocks or boxes. We could identify these patterns as, say, the lower 3 zone. The 3 zone is the open strings to the 3rd fret, and the lower 3 zone is the 3 low strings in that fret spacing. The lower 7 zone is the 7th fret to the 10th fret, and the lower three strings, the E, the A, and the D string, or the 6th, 5th, and 4th string in that area. And then the center zone is everything between the 3rd fret and the 7th fret. We'll call that the center zone. And we will call this big box the lower center zone. Isolating the 3 lower strings like that and separating them from the 4 higher strings with the D string part of both groups reveals a very clear symmetry within each of those levels, the lower and the upper level. Being aware of that while you're playing can go a long way toward giving you a handle on how you can navigate around in a key without relying on always returning to the tonic every time you want to play anything, because now you have a lot of other reference points. Let's look at that center zone a little more. We're going to go only between the 3rd fret and the 7th fret, and we're going to take all the notes of the key that fit between the 3rd fret and the 7th fret. What do we get? We get the big box, and we get those 3 notes on the 1st string, because the 1st string is always the same as the 6th string, so we already know what's going on there. And then we have the 3rd rail, the 2nd string and the 3rd string. And if you haven't watched my video on the 3rd rail, please do. And there's a lot more information about what goes on between those 2 strings. But we're just going to focus on this one aspect of it for the moment. And that is what happens when you go from B to C to D on the 3rd string, and then D to E to F on the 2nd string. So that's a little vortex, I call it, the vortex. Because we end up with this offset kind of pattern. There are no notes on the 3rd fret on the 3rd string in the key of C. So we go 4th fret, 5th fret, 7th fret. And when we get to the 2nd string, we go 3rd fret, 5th fret, 6th fret, because there are no notes on the 7th fret on the 2nd string in the key of C. So that weirdness, that off-centeredness, if you will, that happens between those 2 strings in the 3rd rail itself is a symmetrical pattern. If you see it, half step, whole step, half step. And yeah, we play that note twice. Why? Because it's there. We play it there because it's there, because we want to know where it is. So we're less concerned, as I said, we're less concerned with playing scales than we are with knowing where the notes are. So if we want to play all the notes between the 3rd fret and the 7th fret, between the 5 on the 6th string, the 5 and the 7, 5, 6, 7, well, all we need to know is we just hit the 3rd fret, the 5th fret, and the 7th fret on every string except the vortex. And that vortex, of course, is the center of the key. So it's not just this weird thing that happens somewhere off in the edges of the universe, right? We're right at the center. B, C, D, D, E, F. What does it mean to be at the center of a key? The center of the key, of course, is defined mostly by the tonic, the note the key is named after, C, in this case. And if it's C major, well, then it's also defined by the 3rd above the tonic, the C and the E here. And we can find those 2 notes on the 3rd string and the 2nd string at the 5th fret. Of course, C is preceded by B, and E is followed by F. Those 2 notes, a half step below the tonic and a half step above the mediant, or the 3rd of the key. Those 2 notes comprise the tritone of the key. The tritone of the key is the leading harmony that leads back to the tonic. This is where the key is centered, where the interval structure of the key moves in opposite directions equally from there. If we go down from E, we have D, up from E, F, the leading tone above E, leads down to E, and then we find ourselves on D if we continue going one more step. If we find ourselves on B leading to C and go up one more step, we find ourselves also on D. So this idea of the vortex at the center of the key is based on the symmetry of the structure of the key itself. How do you think about the fretboard? Do you think about it as a place where there's just a lot of chords and scales? Or do you think about it as a place where there are keys, musical keys, major keys, minor keys, and that the chords stem from the keys? That if you don't understand the key structure, well, then you're playing a lot of chords, but you're not really getting how those chords work, how those scales work, how they fit together inside the key, how the songs that you're playing or the music that you're playing is structured based on those keys. Now, not everything fits nice and neatly into the key structure, but without understanding the structure of the key, I think you're going to not really get the entire picture. Say you wanted to play all the notes in the key of C, all the notes on the fretboard in the key of C, without playing a scale. How would you do it? How would you go from one note to another, to another, to another, without playing a scale and without playing any chords? I mean, we can be a little bit loose about the idea of what a chord is here, but let's say we take the open strings and I play all those notes. That's the key of C. Those notes are part of the key of C, every single one of them. The 5th fret, every single one of them, part of the key of C. The 10th fret, every one of those notes, part of the key of C. Now what? Are there any other fret positions where I can do that? Not so easily, because those are the only 3 where I can go all the way across on the same fret and find nothing but notes in the key of C. So that's something. What about... Now, what did I just do? I just played all of the half steps in the key of C, and we have A, D, G, A, D, G. One more note. Now I just played every note on the fretboard in the key of C between the open strings and the 10th fret, and I added a couple up here just for good measure, because we only need from the open strings to the 10th fret, because that's where each individual note is on each string without running into the octave. So you have 7 notes per string, 42 notes total, and you know where they are, not by playing scales, not by playing chords, but just by understanding the structure of the key, playing the key. If we're going to understand the key on the fretboard on its own terms, that means understanding the relationship between these forms, these structures on the fretboard on their own terms. That means we have to give them names. So it's not enough to say that the open strings are all notes of the key of C, the 5th fret is all notes of the key of C, the 10th fret is all notes of the key of C. That's a lot of syllables. So I just call them axis positions. These are diatonic axis positions. And the half steps, the E's, F's, B's, and C's, the 7, 1s, 3s, and 4s, those are half-step clusters because they form clusters. B, C, E, F end up in the same 2 fret positions, except in that center position in the vortex. That sets that one position apart. But those are half-step clusters. So we have half-step clusters, we have axes. Those are the primary structures in delineating the structure of each key. And they have a very solid, predictable, logical connection to each other. The scale patterns that you may know as box patterns or block patterns, I call them zones because they are areas of the key on the fingerboard where you can do more than just play scales if you identify them as regions, as zones, and you identify them in a logical way that pertains to the musical idea itself. So something even as simple as pentatonic scales. I mean, if you learn the pentatonic scale this way, and most of us learn the pentatonic scale that way, that pattern, and very often that pattern will be referred to as pattern 1. The A minor pentatonic scale becomes pattern 1, and the C major pentatonic scale in that method becomes pattern 2. Well, if you're in the key of A minor, great. You can say A is note number 1 in the key of A minor, but C is not note number 2 in the key of A minor. It doesn't matter that you're playing a pentatonic scale and it's the second note in the pentatonic scale. It's the third of the key, and calling it the 2 or the pattern 2 just gives you a disconnect from the musical idea. So if we're interested in understanding the key, we want all of the terminology we use to relate to the key. So something as simple as pentatonic scales. All 3 low open strings are the root notes, or the tonics, if you will. You're in the key of C major / A minor, and you start on E. Most of the time, you could either call that the 3 of the key, or you could say, if you're playing a scale, a diatonic scale based on that note, you could call it Phrygian mode, the final of Phrygian mode, if you want to be really formal. But let's just say we call it the E minor pentatonic scale that we build off of that note. We'll say E minor pentatonic. You're going to go from the open strings to the 3rd fret, to the 5th fret, to the 7th fret, to the 10th fret, and then back to the 12th fret, where you have a complete E minor pentatonic scale. If we do an A minor pentatonic scale, open strings, 3rd fret, 5th fret, 7th fret, 10th fret, 12th fret. If we do a D minor pentatonic scale, open strings, 3rd fret, 5th fret, 7th fret, 10th fret, 12th fret. Well, those are 3 minor pentatonic scales. And all 3 of them, are in the key of C, because all 3 of those scales have nothing but natural tones. There are no sharps or flats in any of those scales. So all 3 of them are in the key of C. And you might think, well, A minor is in the key of C major A minor, because A minor is the relative minor of C. But E minor is the relative minor of G. So how is that in the key of C? Well, the G major chord is in the key of C. And the G major pentatonic scale, likewise, is in the key of C because it has no sharps or flats. The same is true of the F major pentatonic and the D minor pentatonic. So there are 3 pentatonic scales, major and minor modes for each of them, in the key of C. And those 3 pentatonic scales are built on the minor versions of those scales are built on the open 3 lowest strings on the guitar, and the notes of all 3 of them naturally coincide on the same fret positions on those strings. Well, what do we call that? What do we call that? Well, I call those pentatonic axes. The 3 lower strings each have 5 pentatonic axis positions. The open strings, which is also a big axis that goes all the way across, the Phrygian axis, if we want to name it for the Phrygian mode, which begins and ends on E, as does this axis. The Aeolian axis, which begins and ends on A, goes all the way across, but we only need those 3 notes for our pentatonic axis. And the Dorian axis, which begins and ends on D, the second step of the key of C, and that we only need those 3 notes for that. But there are also 2 other smaller axis positions just for these 3 strings, the 3rd fret and the 7th fret. Those are all 5, if we just are looking at only those strings, pentatonic axis positions. So we want to name these things because if you don't have a name for something, you can't really think about it that clearly. And you want to be able to identify them as you go from one key to another. So you don't want to use naming systems that only apply in one key or that are arbitrary based on which sequence you learn them. It never made sense to me. That's why I use a different method. That's why I started thinking about it differently. So all of this stuff, all of this terminology, I know some of it is not standard. I find that a lot of this, what we consider standard terminology, really shouldn't be. I mean, a lot of it leads down the road to actually greater confusion. I've gone through threads at many discussions about music theory on the guitar where people just keep having the same problems, the same disagreements, the same arguments over and over and over and over again. What this is all about is coming to terms with the idea of what a diatonic key, a major key, a minor key, the key signature, circle of fifths set of keys, coming to terms with how that works on the fretboard. What do you call those groupings of notes that form different configurations on the fretboard? How do you identify them? How do you find them? So it's a mapping system. This is a way of mapping the fretboard. And in a metaphorical sense, when I think of mapping the fretboard, I think of mapping a landscape, mapping a terrain. And if this is a terrain, a landscape, a place, well, I like to think of it as the planet guitar. The planet guitar, well, the planet guitar is kind of a flat planet, which will maybe make some people happy. I don't know. But, you know, I think of it as very deep. Mapping the planet guitar means understanding the regions, the land masses, the tectonic plates, the oceans, the islands, the rivers and streams, the streets and avenues of the guitar fretboard. And so I have put together a little tour, a grand tour, if you will, of the planet guitar, which I will present to you in a moment. But first I want to thank everybody who has subscribed. I really, really, really appreciate it. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed, I really would appreciate it if you did. And I will, feel free to comment below. Feel free to comment. Let me know what you think. And I will see you soon. Thank you. The first stop on our grand tour, the pentatonic axis positions. And the three pentatonic scales aligned on them. This accounts for all but 6 note positions on the 3 low strings in the key of C. Which comprise 2 instances of the tritone and the 2 major sevenths of the key. Also revealed by these axis positions is the alignment of the major and minor thirds within the 3 pentatonic scales of the key. Of course, there's a perfect fourth between the scales at each axis position. Reintroducing the half steps, we can see how they form symmetrically positioned clusters. Now we arrive at a procession of fifths, including all the perfect fifths, as well as the diminished fifth, which is an inversion of the tritone. D is at the center of the pattern, and moving outward from D in opposite directions will result in the pairing of specific notes. On these strings in this key, the notes on the 3rd, 5th, and 7th frets form the lower center symmetry, and a pattern I like to call the big box. The big box combines the Mixolydian and Aeolian modes, and on either side of it, there are other symmetrical patterns. The big box is positioned at the center of the lower symmetry. And so from there, we can go outward and upward in both directions. In the center position, we see a unique elliptically shaped half-step cluster, which is one of 5 half-step clusters, along with 2 semi-clusters. Now that we've gotten a glimpse of some of the patterns that can be found by starting at the center and moving outward, let's return our attentions to the center zone. And this time, rather than playing scales, let's look at some arpeggios. So far, all of our attention has been on the area of the fretboard between the open strings and the 10th fret. So our tour of the planet guitar has only visited one of its hemispheres. If we voyage halfway around the planet, we arrive at a position with no notes at all belonging to the key, the fulcrum of yet another symmetrical array, the void. In every key, all of these patterns remain the same. Though the fret positions will change, the key degrees are identical. All of the scales and chords of the 12 diatonic keys follow the same symmetrical structure. That structure is found on the guitar fretboard, if you know what to look for. Approaching the fretboard by starting from each open string, which is the usual method, will not reveal this symmetry. But if you know where the key centers are, and how the notes of the key align in the axis positions and half-step clusters, by understanding the geography of the fretboard landscape, you can have a better awareness of the musical system itself. The awareness of the entire shape of each key will enable you to better apply your knowledge of theory on the instrument.